guess where we should start is you and your brothers growing up. The basics, what it was like before the war, before any of this happened.
Okay. Well, before the war started, of course, we were just a general family farm. The 4 boys on the farm, and 3 tenant families, and everything was done with horsepower. The first tractor that we got, a Fordson tractor. And I also remember the first bag of fertilizer that was purchased and put on the farm. Everything was grown off the land before that time. We call it organic farming, if you want to.
Mm-hmm. That's the modern day politically correct term.
Right.
About how old were you?
About 10 years old. That was somewhere in the mid-30s.
And I imagine that was quite an event.
Oh, yeah.
Was it the first in the area, the first in the neighborhood, or?
No, it really wasn't the first in the neighborhood, but one of the very first ones. And then we upgraded that, and just before the war, we got a 41 model M Farmall, and that was the ultimate thing. And that one is still on the farm down there. Uncle John still has that old M Farmall. Can you imagine, as mechanized as we are now, to have not had a feed grinder, to have not had refrigeration?
The ice box, was that did you have like an ice box?
And had ice box, but no electric refrigeration. Electric lights were put in. Up until that time, we cooked on a wood stove and used coal oil lamps for light. So lots has happened in my life.
Very much has happened. How old were you when you got electric lights?
I need to remember that. I guess not more than 10 years old. And when they put them in, well, they didn't think that they would shine that far, so they put a drop cord so that they could take the light bulb to the various corners of the room to see about like you were carrying a candle.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know that they would be that luminous, that much, give off that much light. So it's an interesting thing.
It's sort of trial and error with it then.
Yeah. Nobody knew. So. But I will remember that. Before that, we had acetylene lights. Dad would go to Nashville and get a barrel of carbide. Now, I don't remember the chemical formula of that, but they would put it in and probably put some moisture or something, and that would give off acetylene gas. And that would be piped to every room, and you go in and turn the valve and slide it. And that would give you your light. So, by today's standards, it was rather primitive.
Well, by today's standards, a lot of things are primitive,
Oh, yes.
So by the time you got to your teenage years, I guess what I need to say is how much of an impact did the outside world have on the family farm? I mean, was it
All the time I got the teens, a whole lot of things had changed. Transportation was much better. We had more machinery on the farm. Roads were better, communications were better. But by teenagers, we had a good telephone. That's an old central crank telephone. Well, we had a dial telephone, one of the first ones that was put in because it was an experimental thing. And they had 3 exchanges, had Normandy and Moortrace and Bell Buckle. Chevrolet wasn't on that dial system at that time. They just put in those 3 little units there to make sure it worked, and it did.
So it was trial and error too with that.
It was an experimental thing. So they found out they would work on a small scale, so they expanded it from that. And we had a person visit us from up in Ohio, and he could not believe it out there in the country like we were, that we had a dial telephone. Thought only the big cities had that. And so we found out that in a rural area that we had that same communication too. It's really interesting.
I would imagine so. By your teenage years, things had changed considerably from when you were younger, and by the time you hit your late teens, how are things happening on a, how did things that were happening on a global level impact your life on the family farm?
Well, quite a lot. See, that was in the beginning of World War II, so there was a complete mobilization and the patriotic feeling that everybody needed to produce to capacity, and the farmers grew everything they could to support the troops, to support the country.
So that pushed you to produce more?
Yeah. Yeah, we put in more acres and worked longer hours. By late teen times, well, there's been a tremendous improvement in roads. You see, that's when 41A was built. They used to call that the military highway, that connected Camp Forest to Nashville, to Fort Campbell. That's part of the mobilization effort.
When did you first get the inkling that maybe this war meant that? When did you first get the idea that either you or someone you would know might have to go fight?
Well, we really didn't know, of course. Mac, the oldest, 5 years older than I am, so he went into service. He was in ROTC at Knoxville, went into service, and then came back, and after service he finished his education up there. Of course, at the time, see, I was far too young. But the war was still going on when I finished high school. And 1 year after high school, I was drafted.
What year was that?
45, April of 45. And Uncle Ralph had signed up to volunteer for the Naval Air Force. Signed up volunteer, optional. And the morning that he got his optional orders in the mail, I got my greetings.
Draft
notice. So I had to go, and because his was optional, he stayed on the farm. He was deferred for farm work because they had plenty of units, as they called them back then, to justify deferment for agricultural purposes.
Now
and of course, Uncle John was 2.5 years younger than I am, so he wasn't up to go. So
I should know this. It's Uncle Mac, then Ralph, and then you, and then Uncle John. So was Uncle Mac serving? Was he still in the service when you were drafted, or was he home then?
No, he's still in service.
How long was he in the service? Just an approximate.
He was in 3 or 4 years, and some time anyway.
And was he drafted, or did he?
I just don't remember if he was drafted or not, or whether he had that obligation through the ROTC and UT when he was enrolled there. We'll ask Uncle Ralph tomorrow and find out. He probably remembers.
What did Uncle Mac being gone, how did that impact the family and you?
Well, of course, we younger ones were still on the farm when Uncle Mac went off to college. We thought that was a big deal, That's just a normal thing that he went to college. during that period of time, too, is when he had to leave for service, mobilization. And again, I don't know whether he was drafted or whether that was part of the sign-up for ROTC or what he was often picked, but he served that period of time in service and then came back and finished his degree at UT after he got back.
Did you get letters and things from him? What was that?
We got letters from him, and part of that time that he was in service, I was in service too.
Were you overseas while he was overseas?
Yeah. Yeah, he was in Europe and I was in Japan. Didn't correspond much.
Guys usually don't unless they're Michael.
Well, let's see. No, let me take that back though. The German War was over in May and the Japanese War was over in August. So he was just gone into service in April before the German War was over. So he was in service a short period of time after I was drafted. And I don't remember when he was discharged, but in that demobilization, at the end of my 2 year service, or 21-month service, he would have been out before that time, when they declared the Japanese War over. Well, see, I spent over a year after that, so he was in service a short period of time. I had to call Aunt Louise on that. But there was an overlap there anyway. The two of us were in service.
So when you were drafted, he was in service.
Yeah.
And then he got out before you were out.
He got out before I did.
So it was...
And the reason I got out with 21-month service is there was a demobilization, sending everybody home. The guys coming home with a few months service, and I had 21 months in.
That book mentions something about that.
And that was long enough.
Yeah.
Oh, and the guys up there at Fort Sheridan being discharged had a couple of months service, and we told them we didn't know what they were missing. We've been in for some of them about 2 years, the same time I got out 21 months. And felt very fortunate getting out that soon. Mm-hmm. But they surely turn them out in a hurry. I'd say most of the guys that were in that time didn't spend 2 years in service. And our replacements were just straight from the States, and they probably wouldn't have spent over another year in Japan. They'd be on rotation.
When you first found out you were drafted, what was that like? I mean, you heard from Uncle Mac about his experiences. Were you expecting?
Well, there was a lot of anger because Uncle Ralph was going to go and I was going to stay at home because I was younger. Mm-hmm. And of course they overcame that, and I said, well, this is my responsibility. I've got to go. I'll do the best I can.
Is that the general feeling within the family too? I mean, your parents and
we do our duty. I'd say we were a whole lot more patriotic back then than that age group or that generation would be now.
Oh, absolutely. So it wasn't a question of whether to not fight it, but it was never an option to not go. It was
no draft dodgers or anything like that. I mean, we had a registration, your number came up, you went, but no ifs, ands, and buts. If it was some reason for some deferment, okay. If you passed the physical, you served. If you didn't pass the physical, you were 4F and didn't have to go. And some that were physically fit, except for maybe something like a hernia or something like that, didn't have to go. And after that, well, they got where, okay, so we'll just fix that and serve anyway.
So you got your papers. How soon from when you got your papers did you have to leave home?
Oh, I can't remember that.
A few weeks,
a few weeks, yeah. A few weeks.
So where'd you go after that? What was your first stop?
We went to Fort Oglethorpe. From Fort Oglethorpe, we were inducted there, sworn into the Army. And they didn't tell us where we were going until we got there. And I ended up in Camp Wheeler. We're just 8 miles out of Macon, Georgia, South Georgia.
Is that where you got basic training?
17 weeks of basic training. Michael would know what that means.
Yeah, were you with anyone else from the area? Anyone you knew, or
not in my
classmates?
company.
Nobody in your company?
No, nobody in my company. There were 4 from south of Mason-Dixon line, and the rest of them were Yankees from around Scranton, PA, except one old lumberjack from Vermont.
So what was that like, getting all because, being a rural farmer in Middle Tennessee, meeting all these Yankees, and people had no idea about your way of life. What was that like?
Sometimes their accent was a little bit hard to understand.
I would imagine so.
Oh my goodness, they say Jesus Christ. That was their byword. How well I remember, Some of them had hot tempers. They loved to drink and go to town, and I didn't. Some of them sort of fly by night. They're very carefree in a way. Different culture.
That was probably quite an impact, quite a shock.
Quite a shock.
So would you say your moral upbringing, I read an account of one soldier who recited the 23rd Psalm each time he went to attack, before his unit made an attack. Would you say your upbringing, the morals, the values you were taught?
Through basic, it gave me a
different perspective from the rest of them?
Perspective than the rest of them. And I ended up as a squad leader rather than a follower, just a leadership role. And they said, well, you farm guys make better soldiers. You country guys make better soldiers than these city guys.
About the religious aspect of it, was that a factor? Because you mentioned the guys with their Bible.
Those guys from up there were Catholic, some degree Catholic. Maybe not devout, what have you, but in my upbringing, I didn't care to corral and round and what have you, but I would say this during training period that your chapels and what have you could have been a little bit more accessible than they were. It looked like the way things went, sometimes there wasn't time to find a church, but still the upbringing gave you that Christian foundation that and your moral standard kept going.
So would you say because of your moral standard, you said you were made a leader, you said other guys looked up, they looked up for you, looked up to you?
Well, I won't say they looked up to me. Sometimes they despised me because I had that leadership role. They didn't want to accept the responsibility, and I was willing to take it.
And that probably came from having grown up on a farm.
Yeah, to see that made the latrines were done, clean, all that sort of thing, and some of them took care less. So somebody had to be in between the cadre and the regular guys. And they were, for the most part, cooperative. Sometimes you had to sort of urge them along a little bit.
It's because they'd grown up in a different way of life.
Yeah. We had a couple of real lazy ones that I guess would be found anywhere.
So would you say that your upbringing on the farm gave you an advantage?
I would say, yeah.
How so? Any ways other than the leadership and the work ethics and the morals?
Well, to some degree, the little bit of mechanics that we experienced on the farm and the ability to get along in nature when you think about field marches, enduring heat and things to do, and bivouac and setting up your own tent and living quarters and that sort of thing. Give you an advantage there because of the rural upbringing, you know, being knowledgeable of the farm and natural conditions. You know how to live in nature a little bit, rather than some guy that didn't know anything but street lights.
Concrete.
Yeah, and concrete and pavement.
So where'd you go after these 17 weeks of basic training?
Oh, we got a wonderful 10-day diluted lay en route. That was our vacation time to stop by home on the way to a further assignment. And from there went to Fort Riley, Kansas, Oregon, for training. From Camp Adair, Oregon, we went to Presidio of Monterey. Yeah. The Japanese War was over in August, and this was in September that happened. So they got us to Presidio in a staging area, and they had selected us for members of military government company. And from there, we went south to out of Presidio, we went to Field it was, and close to Anaheim, and then we were put on the ship. Wait a minute, that's Los Angeles, wasn't it? San Francisco, Los Angeles. What's the city sister city down there? Anyway, the staging area was March Field. I remember that. Riverside, California. 1,500 of us on that ship as we were shipped over. That was in October of 45. And
much time had elapsed from when you'd gotten your first papers to when you're on the ship going to Japan?
Yeah, 6 weeks. Where we were going, you know, from Presidio, Monterey, they shipped us down there. We weren't at Riverside but just a few days. And then they put us on the ship and spent 13 days going across the Pacific.
I like on the ship.
Right. Got a lot of seasick soldiers, okay, but not crowded conditions. The Navy took us over, and that was about half capacity. The ship would haul about 3,000, and there were about 1,500 of us, all assigned to military government companies throughout Japan. And the Navy even served 3 meals a day. Not 2, but 3 meals a day.
Mm-hmm.
And they were nice to us. They were guys just like we were. They're doing their job too.
Mm-hmm.
And enough of us GIs to show us a movie at night on the deck. So the guy would come out and sit on the deck and hit a big screen up there and they'd show us a movie.
Every night? All 13 nights or just about?
About 3 nights a week. Weather-wise, well, if I remember right, the weather cooperated real well going over there. I don't remember actually any real rough times or a lot of rain or that sort of thing going to Japan. Going directly from San Pedro to Yokohama.
What was your initial impression?
Of Japan?
Mm-hmm.
You could smell it 300 miles off the coast, off the shore. Smell civilization. It stunk. To be frank.
So it was another culture culture shock only quite a bit different from meeting the different people from the different regions. It was just, did you expect, how were your expectations in comparison to the actual, did you have anything?
Well, I really didn't know what to expect. I would say that really, for the most part, Japan was a little bit more primitive than I expected, and than I expected. Quite crowded. Walks and then yards and that sort of thing. The buildings were built right to the edge of a gutter at the edge of a street. No lawns, no front yards, and what have you. The buildings are built right to the edge of the gutter. You had a little vestibule where you could go in before you enter the house and you pull your shoes off and go in and you sock feet. They didn't have the room. They built so close together to conserve the land for other purposes. It's totally different culture. We didn't know what to expect when we got there. So. But when they landed us over there and took us to our distribution points, you might say that it was at Suki Air Force Base at Yokohama, in old Air Force barracks there, and you slept on a plank, and they had two decks, downstairs and upstairs. Mine happened to be in the upstairs, and then after we were there a couple of days, well, they did find some canvas cots for us to sleep on. That's worse than sleeping on the floor. The hair was under, you know, but it wasn't extremely cold, about 28, but it was very damp. So we were there a few days, and then they sent us to Sendai, to northern Japan. So about 350 miles north of Tokyo, close to Hokkaido.
I'm going to look up the spellings later.
Hokkaido. Hokkaido, that's the northernmost island. Sendai, Sendai. From Sendai, they split us further, and then after we got over there, they decided they need military government company 350 miles south of Tokyo. We were in Sendai about a month, and then they shipped us south to Nara, N-A-R-A, Nara, close to Kyoto, Osaka, Kyoto. But the place that our office was in Nara, and that was Kyoto was the largest city that was not bombed, and Nara was the second largest city that never a shell fell in, because that was two of the religious centers of the Shintoism. So they preserved those, not to destroy their religion. It was part of getting the cooperation of the Japanese population. If it didn't destroy the religion, then they could manipulate them better. Did it manipulate the word for it? Or just control them better, or get their cooperation better. And it worked.
So how important was the average person that you met? Was that religion that, was it like us going to church on Sundays?
They never displayed that religion was so different. They didn't gather together like Presbyterians or Baptists or Church of Christ or Church of God or anything like that. It was more of their worship and what have you was displayed in the home on an individual basis, a family basis, you know. But they did have their places that they came to, stations that they came to pray and give their offerings. Those shrines. And small, scattered over, just about like a gazebo.
Mm-hmm.
Scattered over the city, you know. And then where we stayed over there was right at the end of the Isle of 1,000 Lanterns. If I had another month, I'd look up one of those tour guides of Nara for you. And that was, and of course everybody in Japan has a birthday at the same time for 3 days, it's the first year. you don't have a birthday in August and May or September or something. Everybody celebrates their birthday at the same time. So for 3 days and nights we could hear people. There were so many people going to this shrine to pray and what have you. At that time now, this is a celebration of the crusade or pilgrimage, if you want to call it that. The street would be full going up, pack all day and all night, and then coming back another one-way street 2 blocks over, coming back to the train station and tram line and what have you, the same way. So that was continual for 3 days.
Other culture shock.
Yeah.
So you finally get to Nara where they finally decided that's really where they want you. Mm-hmm. What did they tell you were required to do, or?
Military government. And I was in the public health and welfare division of that military government. And that was helping them get established in democratic ways of public health and welfare organization on state level.
And did they assign you to work with a certain group of Japanese people and say,
well, within that division, within the public health and welfare department of that state, I remember one of the head men was Ishinishi, Dr. Ishii. They were very cooperative. Anything that we asked them to do, they would do it. And during that period of time, of course, in the latter part of the winter there, we had a typhus epidemic. Typhus was carried by lice on humans. And death losses in the neighboring prefecture at Osaka were tremendous, over 100 a day for several weeks. But we only lost 69 total. We just happened to get a jump on it. And that's when DDT was legal. So quickly set up an organization so that all the population was dusted with DDT. That was repeated in 2 weeks. And they couldn't take a bath for 2 weeks. But we held mortality down very well.
How many, you said your group lost 69, how many were in there total? How many went with you to that area?
No, I'm talking about Japanese deaths there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your group
No GIs were lost.
No GIs lost at all. Okay.
That was the Japanese population.
So it was in other areas that 100 day deaths, but in your particular area you only lost 69 because
of the whole state, There were thousands of them died in Osaka from that. Because of black market and clothing and that sort of thing were infected by lice. And that same spring we also had a cholera epidemic. Of course that came under public health welfare. And we didn't have one death in that. And many in other prefectures. But we used the same Japanese organization in controlling it. The same setup, the same chain of command. Because they were very cooperative. They were totally suppressed people, and they were very cooperative in what we asked them to do.
What were your actual, you helped in the public health and welfare, what was a typical day? A typical week?
It varied so much from office work to field work that I would say that no 2 days were really alike. We kept records. Well, anything that we could do to help the Japanese, whatever required, from even got them vaccinated for smallpox, prepare the smallpox outbreak, the water supply, just anything that help them. And they realized that from the military government, places they could come for help rather than being occupied by the regular troops. Those guys with the blue braid on their caps and the military government insignia were friends.
Blue braid on the cap.
Mm-hmm.
Did they get to where they would come to you with specific problems?
Yep. Yes, they would. They were very cooperative. Like they came to us with the poor water supply. Can you help us get better water supply? We have the old pipeline laid and what have you. Well, yes, we think we can help with that. So, through channels, we got a brand new inline pump put in the water supply so we all have plenty of water. Because they had so many refugees from Osaka that the population was double its normal population in Malta.
So would you say your agricultural background helped you over there too?
I remember working out the first order for fertilizer that came back into that prefecture after the war. But it was a little bit hard to understand that the rice paddies were set by hand. They were plowed with one ox, if you want to call it that, or one cow, with a primitive plow. Totally different.
Able to help them advance agriculturally?
Not in that 1 year, no.
Last time I talked to you about this, you said helping someone with the dairy operation.
There were 3 dairies in that whole state. One was completely annihilated by the Japanese troops, saying they needed something to eat. One had 3 cows left, and the only reason they were left was because the war was over and they spared them. The largest dairy had 18 cows. And he was a very progressive, up-to-date man. As his herd sire came from Wisconsin. And he was growing alfalfa. Wisconsin, which is at that time in the United States. So he was very up-to-date, very intelligent man. He was a victim of circumstance because the Japanese leaders were going to war. He didn't.
From the common people that did they I guess they more or less had to support the war, but were they in favor of it? Were they?
Oh, the average person did not want war. It was the leaders of Japan that caused the war, not the average population of the regular population. I even knew an ex-kamikaze pilot. He ran a little shop right across from my office building. And he told me that he was drafted just like I was. And after he was drafted, then they made him all of the promises and told him it was such an honor to die for the emperor and all, and made promises to take care of the family and that sort of thing, but didn't convince him. And he missed his flight by 3 days. His number was already up to make his kamikaze fatal flight. And the war was over 3 days before he had to make that flight. So he was a regular guy just like any other GI. He was drafted. I suppose that's true in any war, that the regular soldiers, maybe they don't want to fight, but they have to.
They were pretty much It changed day to day, what you did.
Yes.
Any memorable, I mean, I'm sure there's many, but any particular stories or people that...
Like this one here had a show master, a person in charge. He was responsible for getting all the people together and to get them organized. We went to that show master and showed him what he had to do to dust the people. Everybody accounted for it. It's his responsibility, and the Japanese culture, if he didn't do it, they'd give you a whooping. A beating, I mean a real beating. So they were afraid not to. Now, we didn't do it. The Japanese did that through their social change, you see. So they were compelled to cooperate with the showmaster's orders, and it's very effective in getting a thorough job done. Well, after we dusted them for typhus and stopped the lice and that epidemic, well, they were very cooperative when they said, look, you need to be vaccinated for cholera. And we won't to spray any pool or flood or anything like that with DDT. You do it. They did it. We're afraid of a smallpox epidemic. Everybody needs to be vaccinated. They use the same tender organization, and they did that very effectively and efficiently. Then they had a rat. One of the memorable things is a rat epidemic. You could see rats in the street during the daytime. You know, just many of them walk down the street, see them sitting out there in the gutters, and we had to get rid of them because they were tied in with the typhus too. You see, plus the fact they were biting a lot of people. You know. So through GI channels, well, we made poison rat bait and distributed that through that very same organization there, scattered all over town. So we actually eradicated the rats and all.
Does it help?
Oh yeah. Nobody got told. Thank you, thank you.
Scared me for a minute. 21 months of different day to day.
No action.
No action at all.
No action, no shooting.
Imagine you were glad when that 21 months was over.
Oh yeah. Very, very glad when it was over.
So when did you get home?
We got home in, let's see, that was in November of 46. Discharged in January of 1947. Our commanding officer says, I want this to be the sharpest looking outfit in the city of Nora. I'm going to hire a Japanese tailor to come in and measure all of you. And I want your clothes to fit perfectly. I don't want any baggy shirts and baggy pants. I want you to have baggy coats. I want it to fit perfectly. I want you to be the sharpest looking outfit in all Japan. And you could pick us out on the streets from that because our clothes fit so nicely. Professional, in other words, you know. Military government was set apart from the others. And I do think that just in creating the right image for us in the eyes of the Japanese. We employed Japanese help in kitchen, housekeeping, that sort of thing.